My daughter hid my grandchild's christening. A month later, I got custody. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The call came at 3 in the morning. I remember because I was awake anyway, as I often am these days, sitting in the kitchen with cold tea in my favorite cup, the one with the chipped handle that I've never bothered to replace. Mom? Sarah's voice was small, frightened. Mom, I think something's wrong. I was dressed and in the car within 5 minutes. She was 32 years old, 8.5 months pregnant with my first grandchild, and standing in the doorway of her apartment, looking pale and scared when I arrived. Her husband Mark was away on a business trip. She was alone. Tell me, I said, taking her hand. I don't know. Something feels different, wrong. We went to the hospital. I sat with her through the examination, holding her hand while she cried silent tears of fear. The doctor said the baby was fine, but might come early. They kept her for observation. Mark arrived the next afternoon, stressed and guilty for being away. I stayed with them both, bringing food, making sure Sarah was comfortable, being the steady presence I'd always tried to be. 3 days later, at 6 in the evening, Thomas was born. 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Perfect. I was the first person besides the nurses to hold him. Sarah was exhausted. Mark was on the phone with relatives, and the nurse placed this tiny, wrinkled, impossibly beautiful creature in my arms. Hello, sweetheart, I whispered. I'm your grandmother. He opened his eyes dark blue, unfocused, and something in my chest cracked open. A feeling I hadn't experienced since Sarah herself was born. This overwhelming, terrifying love that made you understand you'd do anything, sacrifice anything, for this small life. The first 2 months were hard for Sarah. She developed postpartum depression, not severe, but enough that simple tasks felt impossible. I moved into their guest room. I took the night shifts when Thomas cried. I cooked meals, did laundry, cleaned, organized. I held Sarah when she cried and told her she was doing fine, that it would get better, that she was a good mother. I don't know what I'd do without you, Mom, she said one night, exhausted and grateful. You'd manage, I told her, but you don't have to. I'm here. Mark was helpful but overwhelmed. He had a demanding job and seemed afraid of his own son, holding Thomas like he might break. It was me and Sarah, mostly, in those early days. Up at 2, at 4, at 6. The smell of formula and baby powder, the soft weight of Thomas against my shoulder as I walked him through the apartment at dawn, humming old lullabies. I loved every minute of it. By month 3, Sarah was better. The medication had helped. She was smiling again, laughing with Thomas, settling into motherhood. I started sleeping at my own apartment more often, coming over just during the days to help. You should rest, Mom, she'd say. You've done so much. I like being here, I'd tell her. Which was true. My apartment felt too quiet, too empty. Here, there was life and noise and purpose. I didn't realize then that I was already becoming a problem. It started small. Sarah would mention wanting to try something with Thomas, and I'd gently suggest the way I'd done it with her. She'd be dressing him, and I'd adjust his clothes without thinking. She'd start to make him a bottle, and I'd already have one prepared. Mom, I can do it, she'd say, and there was a new edge in her voice. I know, sweetheart. I'm just helping. I know, but maybe let me figure some things out myself. I backed off, or tried to, but it's hard when you've been doing something for months to suddenly stop. When you're the one who knows exactly how Thomas likes to be held when he's fussy, exactly which lullaby soothes him, exactly how warm his bath should be. Mark started working longer hours. Sarah mentioned he was stressed. Their apartment felt tense when he was home. I tried not to notice, tried not to interfere. But I saw things. The way he'd snap at Sarah over small things. The way he'd retreat to his office instead of helping with Thomas. The way Sarah's face would tighten when she heard his key in the door. "Is everything okay with you two?" I asked once carefully. "Fine, Mom, we're fine." But they weren't. I could feel it. When Thomas was 5 months old, they went to dinner, their first night out since he was born. I stayed with him, gave him his bottle, rocked him to sleep, and felt purely content. This was what I was meant to do. Care for people I loved. Be useful. Be needed. When they came home, Sarah seemed distant. She checked on Thomas, then came back to where I was gathering my things. "Mom, we need to talk." My heart sank at her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I think maybe you should come less often. Not because you're not helpful. You are. You've been amazing. But I think Mark and I need more time. Just us. To figure out being parents." "Of course," I said, trying not to show how much it hurt. "Of course, sweetheart. I understand." I didn't, though. Not really. What was there to figure out? You love your child, you take care of them, you do what needs to be done, and if someone offers to help, you let them. But I smiled and hugged her and went home to my too-quiet apartment. The next weeks were harder. I'd call to check in, and Sarah would be brief, distracted. I'd offer to come help, and she'd say they were managing fine. I'd suggest bringing dinner, and she'd say they'd already ordered something. I saw Thomas once a week if I was lucky. Each time, he seemed bigger, different. I was missing things. His first time rolling over, his first laugh, a real belly laugh. Sarah mentioned these milestones casually, not realizing each one felt like a small loss to me. "You're being silly," my friend Janet said over coffee. "You're his grandmother, not his mother. Of course you're not there for everything." "I know," I said. "I know that." But knowing didn't make it hurt less. When Thomas was 7 months old, I asked Sarah about the christening. We were having lunch, just us. Thomas with a babysitter. It was rare that we had time alone anymore. "We're thinking about it," she said vaguely. "We haven't decided on a date yet." "I'd love to help plan it," I offered, "if you want, or just be there, whatever you need." "Sure, Mom. When we figure it out, I'll let you know." That was late September. In early November, on a Thursday afternoon, I ran into Martha from my book club at the grocery store. We chatted about the usual things, the weather, the library's new hours, her daughter's new job. Then she said, "How was the christening? Sarah looked lovely in the photos." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "The christening?" "Thomas's christening. Last Sunday, I saw the pictures on Facebook. Such a beautiful ceremony." I finished the conversation somehow, smiled, made appropriate noises, got to my car. Then I sat in the parking lot and opened Facebook with shaking hands. There they were. Photos from 4 days ago. Sarah in a cream dress, Mark in a suit, Thomas in an elaborate white christening gown I'd never seen. The church, the priest, the godparents, Mark's brother, and Sarah's college friend Rebecca. Family members I recognized, friends I knew. I scrolled through 23 photos, searched for my face, knew I wouldn't find it. I hadn't been invited, hadn't been told, hadn't been wanted. I sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes staring at those photos, at my grandson in his white gown, at my daughter's smile, at the life they'd created that apparently had no room for me. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a hollow, aching void where something vital had been ripped out. I drove home, made tea that went cold in my cup, sat in the kitchen as evening darkened to night, trying to understand. Had I been that terrible? That overbearing? That much of a burden that my own daughter couldn't bear to have me at her son's christening? My phone stayed silent. No call to explain, no message to apologize. Just silence. I didn't call her either. Pride, maybe. or fear of what she might say, that I'd been too much, that she was relieved I hadn't been there, that this was her life now, and I wasn't part of it. 3 days passed, then a week, then 2. Finally, I sent a text. I saw the photos. He looked beautiful. She responded 6 hours later. Thanks, Mom. Sorry we didn't tell you. It was a small thing, last minute. But it wasn't small, and it wasn't last minute. I'd seen the elaborate decorations, the catered food in the background of the photos, the formal invitations someone had posted. This had been planned for weeks, maybe months. They'd just planned it without me. I stopped calling as often. When Sarah called, rare now, I kept conversations brief, polite, surface level. Are you okay, Mom? She asked once. Fine, sweetheart, just busy. I wasn't busy. I was heartbroken. But what was the point in saying so? I saw Thomas once in the next 3 weeks, a brief visit where Sarah seemed anxious for me to leave. Thomas had grown. He was starting to pull himself up on furniture, another milestone I'd missed. When I left, he cried and reached for me. Sarah scooped him up quickly. He's tired, she said. Nap time. But I saw in her face what she wasn't saying. Don't make this harder. Don't make him want you more than he should. I drove home through November rain and let myself finally cry. December came, the holidays approaching. I wondered if I'd be invited for Christmas, if they'd find an excuse, if this was how it would be now, me on the periphery of my grandson's life, occasionally permitted to visit, never quite welcome. My phone rang on December 18th at 2 in the afternoon. An unfamiliar number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Emily Chen from Child Protective Services. My heart stopped. Is Thomas okay? Is my grandson? Thomas is fine, Mrs. Patterson, but I need to speak with you about a situation involving your daughter and son-in-law. I don't remember the drive to their office. I remember sitting in a small room with industrial carpet and fluorescent lights while Emily Chen explained. There had been an incident. Mark had left, suddenly, completely, emptied their bank accounts and moved in with someone he'd been seeing for months. Sarah had discovered it 2 days ago and had what they were calling an emotional crisis. A neighbor had called when they heard her screaming. The police had come. Sarah wasn't hurt, but she wasn't stable. She'd been hospitalized for evaluation. Thomas had been placed in emergency foster care. We need to find a family placement, Emily said gently. You're the next of kin. Would you be willing to take temporary custody while we assess the situation? Would I be willing? Yes, I said. Yes. When can I get him? We need to do a home evaluation, run some checks. It should take about a week. A week? He's with strangers. He doesn't know them. He'll be scared. I understand, Mrs. Patterson. I'm going to expedite this as much as possible, but I need to ask you some questions first. She asked about my health, my home, my finances, my relationship with Sarah and Thomas. I answered everything honestly. Yes, my relationship with Sarah had become strained. No, I didn't know about the marriage problems. Yes, I could provide a stable home. Yes, I wanted this. More than anything, the week that followed was a blur of paperwork and home visits and background checks. I cleaned my apartment, set up the spare bedroom that had been my office, bought a crib, a changing table, toys, clothes in the right size, made lists of everything I'd need. Every night, I lay awake thinking about Thomas in a stranger's home, wondering if they held him right, if they knew his favorite lullaby, if he was crying for someone familiar. Emily called on day 6. You've been approved. You can pick him up tomorrow morning. I didn't sleep that night. The foster home was in a quiet neighborhood. A kind-looking woman in her 50s answered the door. Behind her, I could hear Thomas crying, not the angry cry of a tantrum, but the heartbroken sob of a child who's lost and afraid. He's been upset, the woman said apologetically. We've done everything we can, but he keeps crying for Mama and Nana. I'm Nana, I said. She led me to the living room. Thomas was in a playpen, red-faced and tear-streaked, clutching a blanket I didn't recognize. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "Nana!" He reached up, desperate, and I picked him up and held him close, felt his small body shaking with sobs against my shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered. "It's okay. Nana's here. I've got you. You're coming home with me." He buried his face in my neck and cried harder, but different now. Relief, recognition, safety. I took him home, his new home, at least for now. I bathed him, fed him, rocked him. He wouldn't let me put him down. Every time I tried, he'd whimper and cling tighter. So I held him, walked with him, hummed the lullabies he knew. Eventually, exhausted, he fell asleep in my arms. I put him in the crib I'd set up next to my bed. All night, I woke every hour to check on him, make sure he was breathing, make sure this was real. Sarah was released from the hospital 3 days later. Emily called to tell me she'd be coming to visit Thomas. She arrived at 4 in the afternoon. I'd just put Thomas down for his nap. She stood in my doorway, looking thin and hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that hung loose on her frame. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. "Come in." We sat in my living room, the room where she'd grown up, where she'd done homework and watched TV and had birthday parties and told me about her first kiss. Now we sat like strangers, careful and distant. "How is he?" she asked. "Adjusting. He cries at night sometimes. But he's okay." She nodded, looking at her hands. "Emily said you took him immediately, that you got approved in less than a week." "Yes." "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't—" Her voice broke. "He's my grandson," I said simply. "Where else would he be?" We sat in silence. From the bedroom, I heard Thomas stirring. "Can I see him?" Sarah asked. I brought him out. He was groggy from sleep, confused. He saw Sarah and his face lit up. "Mama!" She reached for him, and I handed him over, watched her hold him and cry silently into his hair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama's so sorry." She held him for an hour. We didn't talk. There was too much to say, and no words adequate for saying it. When it was time for her to leave, she wasn't allowed unsupervised visits yet. She handed Thomas back reluctantly. At the door, she finally spoke. "You're probably wondering why." "Why what?" "Why I shut you out. Why I didn't invite you to the christening." I waited. "Mark didn't like you being around so much," she said, not meeting my eyes. "He said you were taking over, that I'd never learn to be a real mother if you kept doing everything. He said you were trying to replace him. I thought if I pushed you away, things would get better between us. That we'd be a real family. Just us 3? She laughed bitterly. "Turns out we weren't a family at all. He was already with her, already planning to leave. I was so focused on pushing you away that I didn't see I was the one being left." Sarah. "The christening was Mark's idea, his whole family, his friends. He said if I invited you, you'd take over, make it about you. I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to believe my marriage was worth fighting for, and I fought for it by hurting you, by cutting you out, by making you feel like you didn't matter." She finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "And then everything fell apart. And you were still here. You were still here, even after I treated you so badly. You took him without hesitation. You didn't say, 'I told you so,' or 'You deserve this.' You just showed up, like you always have." I felt my own tears start. "You're my daughter. He's my grandson. What else would I do?" "I don't deserve your help." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But you have it anyway. That's what family is. Not when it's easy, when it's hard." She sobbed then, and I held her like I'd held her countless times before, through breakups and failures and disappointments, through all the times life had hurt her. "I can't forgive myself," she whispered. "You don't have to, not today. Today you just have to get better. For him, for yourself." She left eventually, promised to go to her therapy appointments, take her medication, work with Emily and the social workers, promise to do the work to get Thomas back. I closed the door and went to check on him. He was playing with blocks on the floor, babbling to himself. When he saw me, he smiled. "Nana." I sat down next to him. He climbed into my lap immediately, settled against my chest like he belonged there. That night, after I put him to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the journal I'd kept for years, but rarely wrote in anymore. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "You think you know what love is. You think it's birthday parties and graduations and wedding days, the proud moments, the celebrations. But real love is 3 a.m. when your grandson can't sleep in a strange place and you walk him through a dark apartment singing the same lullaby for the 100th time. Real love is taking a child into your home when his world has fallen apart, when his parents have failed him, when the life he knew has shattered. Real love is forgiving the daughter who hurt you, not because she's earned it, but because she needs it." Sarah hid the christening from me. She chose her failing marriage over her mother. She pushed me away when I wanted nothing but to help, to be there, to love them both. And when everything collapsed, when her choices led her to a breaking point, when her son needed safety and stability and care, they called me. Not because I'd been invited to the celebration, but because I'd always been the foundation. She hid the joy from me, thought I was the problem, thought removing me would fix what was broken in her marriage. But God or fate, or justice, or simple human need brought Thomas back to me anyway. Not as revenge, not as vindication, just as reality. Because love isn't always about being wanted. Sometimes it's about being needed, about being the one who shows up when everything else falls away. Sometimes love is not an invitation to the party. It's being the one they call when the party's over and everyone else has gone home, and there's just a child who needs someone to hold him in the dark and tell him everything will be okay. And mean it. I will raise him as long as I'm needed. I will love Sarah through her recovery. I will forgive what needs to be forgiven and hold boundaries where they need to be held. Because that's what you do when you love people. Not when it's pretty, when it's hard. I closed the journal, finished my tea, checked on Thomas one more time, sleeping peacefully now. His small fist curled around the blanket, his breathing steady and sure. Then I went to bed in my own room, 20 feet away from my grandson, and slept better than I had in months. Because sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about being exactly where you're supposed to be, exactly when you're needed most. And I was needed. After months of being pushed away, dismissed, excluded, I was needed. Not at the christening, no. But for everything that came after. And somehow, that was enough.